blood, sand, and roaring crowds. The gladiator games of ancient Rome are often romanticized in movies, depicted as heroic battles of strength and honor. But behind the spectacle lay a much darker truth, a world of exploitation, cruelty, and political manipulation, where men's lives were gambled away for entertainment. Today, we uncover the dark side of the gladiator games. The gladiator games didn't begin as public entertainment. In fact, their roots stretch back to solemn rituals of death. In early Roman and Etruscan culture, funerals were not silent occasions. They were dramatic, symbolic events. Romans believed that the spirits of the dead required blood to be appeased, and that death itself had to be honored with more death. At funerals of wealthy nobles, slaves, or prisoners were forced to fight to the death as offerings. This practice, known as munera, was not about spectacle but sacrifice. Blood spilled in combat was seen as a gift to the deceased, a way of ensuring peace in the afterlife. The first recorded gladiatorial contest in Rome took place in 264 BCE. It was arranged by the sons of a nobleman named Junius Brutus Pera in honor of their father's death. 3 pairs of gladiators fought in the Forum Boarium, the cattle market. It was brutal, small-scale, and highly symbolic. But the appetite for blood grew. Over time, these solemn rituals transformed into something else entirely. By the 1st century BCE, munera were no longer private religious rites. They had become mass entertainment, orchestrated by politicians to gain popularity with the people. What began as offerings to the dead became a spectacle for the living. With Rome's expansion came prisoners of war, thousands of them. Captured soldiers, rebels, and enslaved men filled the ranks of gladiators. By the late Republic, the scale of these games was astonishing. Julius Caesar once staged contests involving 300 pairs of gladiators, dazzling the crowds of Rome. Later, Emperor Titus inaugurated the Colosseum in 80 CE with 100 days of games, featuring not only gladiators but wild beasts and naval battles staged in a flooded arena. The amphitheater became the stage upon which power was displayed. A successful politician was not just one who could govern, but one who could put on a show. When we imagine gladiators, we think of muscular warriors celebrated like sports stars. The truth was far harsher. Most gladiators were not volunteers. They were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Stripped of their freedom, they were forced into ludi, gladiator schools. Their diets were carefully controlled. Surprisingly, many gladiators ate a vegetarian diet heavy in beans and barley, earning them the nickname hordearii, barley men. Discipline was strict. Defiance could mean flogging, branding, or worse. Gladiators lived together in cells, constantly reminded of their expendability. Suicide was common and brutal. Ancient sources tell of prisoners strangling each other with chains rather than face the arena. And yet, gladiators were paradoxically both despised and admired. They were outcasts, denied citizenship and honor. But in the arena, they could become celebrities, adored by the crowd. Women flocked to them. Inscriptions boast of gladiator lovers, and souvenirs celebrated their victories. It was a life of contradiction. Reviled slaves on the street, but stars in the sand. The Roman elite knew exactly how to keep the masses entertained and distracted. Gladiator games were funded by wealthy magistrates and emperors who hoped to win favor with the people. Admission was free. Sometimes food and drinks were distributed. This practice gave rise to the famous phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The suffering of gladiators became a currency of power. A generous show could secure political office. A spectacular set of games could immortalize an emperor. For the elite, gladiator blood was an investment. Contrary to Hollywood's depictions, not every gladiator fight ended in death. But the threat of death was always there. A wounded gladiator could beg for mercy by raising his finger. But mercy was a privilege, not a right. The crowd roared, demanding life or death. The emperor gave the final sign: thumb up for mercy, thumb down for death. A single gesture determined the fate of a man. And then there were the executions. Criminals condemned to die were often sent into the arena. Some were torn apart by wild animals and hunts called venations. Others were burned alive or forced to reenact myths where death was inevitable, like Icarus falling to his death or Hercules consumed by flames. The arena was not just sport. It was a theater of suffering. Despite the cruelty, some gladiators rose to fame. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, led the most famous slave revolt in 73 BCE. He and 70 fellow gladiators escaped from a school in Capua, armed with kitchen knives. Their rebellion grew into a massive army of 70,000 slaves, challenging Rome itself. Though crushed, Spartacus became a symbol of resistance. Commodus, the emperor himself, fought as a gladiator. Draped in golden armor, he staged rigged fights, slaughtered animals, and demanded the adoration of the crowd. For Romans, it was scandalous, the emperor lowering himself to the status of a gladiator. Inscriptions also tell us of lesser-known stars. Flamma, who fought 34 times, won his freedom 4 times, and yet chose to keep fighting. Or Marcus Attilius, a free man who volunteered, defeated veterans, and won admiration. Their stories highlight the contradictions. Men who were both despised and adored, enslaved and yet worshipped. Imagine living each day knowing your survival depended on bloodshed. For many gladiators, despair was constant. Roman writers describe the psychological toll. Seneca, the philosopher, attended the games and was horrified. He wrote of men being killed not for justice or defense, but for amusement. Juvenal mocked the bloodlust of the mob. Cicero admitted the games hardened the people to cruelty. The arena desensitized Rome. Violence was not shocking, it was entertainment. Children grew up watching executions as if they were plays. Women swooned over killers. The state normalized bloodshed. By the time the Colosseum was completed in 80 CE, gladiator games had become the heartbeat of Roman culture. This massive amphitheater could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators. Its underground chambers housed animals, machinery, and gladiators awaiting death. With pulleys and trapdoors, wild beasts could spring onto the stage, naval battles could be staged in flooded basins, and executions could be carried out with theatrical flair. For the emperors, the Colosseum was a political stage. Generosity was measured by the grandeur of the games. Titus opened it with 100 days of blood. Trajan once staged contests involving 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals. The Colosseum was not just architecture, it was propaganda carved in stone. By the 4th century CE, the gladiator games began to wane. The empire was changing. Christianity was spreading. Christian leaders condemned the bloodshed, calling it inhumane. The philosopher Lactantius wrote, "To kill a man for sport is not entertainment, but murder." Augustine of Hippo described how the games corrupted the soul, telling the story of his friend Alypius, who swore never to attend, but upon seeing the spectacle, became addicted to blood. Gradually, laws restricted the games. By the 5th century, gladiatorial combat had disappeared, but its legacy never vanished. Even today, echoes of the arena survive in sports stadiums, in action films, in the way violence is packaged as spectacle. The gladiator games of Rome remind us that beneath the grandeur of empires, there is often a darker truth. What we celebrate as culture can sometimes be built on the suffering of the powerless. And though Rome has fallen, the lessons of its arenas still challenge us. What price are we willing to pay for entertainment? Remember, history is never just in the past.